Friday night wasn't supposed to end like this. I had left work early, feeling a rare surge of spontaneity. A quick stop at the local Thai place, her favorite, was meant to be a simple treat. Amanda had been mentioning how tired she felt lately, and I thought bringing home her favorite pad Thai might lift her spirits. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was oddly quiet. Usually, the sound of a TV show or her laughter on a call would greet me before I even opened the door. But not tonight. Inside, the air felt heavy. Amanda's phone sat on the kitchen counter, unlocked. It was strange enough to make me stop mid-step. That phone was like an extension of her hand, always glued to her. The little green bubble notification flashed persistently on the screen. A gut feeling tugged at me, warning me to walk away. But something inside me wouldn't let it go. I swiped the screen. At first, the messages didn't make sense. Daniel's name, my best friend of over a decade, popped up repeatedly in her chat list. The more I scrolled, the clearer it became. Not just Daniel. Chris, Mike, Jacob. The texts were raw, explicit, and worst of all, devoid of guilt. Amanda wasn't just unfaithful, she was methodical. Each name represented someone I trusted, and her betrayal ran so much deeper than a single affair. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened as if the air in the room had been sucked out. I clutched the counter, trying to keep steady, but the world swirled around me. Her footsteps descending the stairs snapped me out of the haze. "Oh, you're home early," she said casually, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Her smile was the same one that once lit up my world. Now it was a mask, hiding the woman she'd become. I didn't reply. I couldn't. The dam inside me was about to burst, but I knew better than to let it show. Not yet. Instead, I stared at her phone on the counter, then back at her. She followed my gaze, and for the briefest moment, her expression faltered. "Did you touch my phone?" Her voice was sharp now, defensive. "What is this?" I held it up, my hand trembling slightly. Her face shifted, a mix of panic and anger. "Ryan, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I snapped. My voice cracked, betraying the control I was trying to maintain. "Daniel, he's been going through a rough time. We were just talking." "Don't make this into something it's not," she said, her voice dripping with indignation. But her eyes gave her away. "And Chris? Mike? Jacob? Are they all going through rough times too?" I spat back, throwing the phone onto the counter. She flinched but held her ground. "You're being paranoid. It's just harmless flirting. Nothing happened." "Nothing happened?" My laugh was bitter, foreign even to my own ears. "You expect me to believe that? I've seen the messages, Amanda. The photos. You didn't even bother to delete them." She crossed her arms, defiant. "If you're going to overreact, I'm not even going to bother explaining. You're always looking for a reason to accuse me of something." My mind reeled. She wasn't apologetic, she was annoyed. Annoyed at being caught. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "Not now," I thought. "Not here." "Fine," I said finally, my voice hollow. "Don't explain. I've seen enough." Her eyes widened, perhaps realizing I wasn't going to fight or plead. Maybe she expected a scene, yelling, tears. But I walked out, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed and her lies hanging in the air like smoke. As I drove away, one thing became clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind replayed the scene at home, the lies, her defiance, and the names flashing on her phone. Daniel, Chris, Mike, Jacob. Each one felt like a dagger to the back. They weren't just acquaintances. They were supposed to be my friends. People I trusted with my life. By the time I pulled into the empty parking lot of a nearby park, the initial storm inside me had dulled into something colder. I stared out into the darkness, the distant streetlights casting long shadows over the empty benches and swings. For the first time in years, I felt completely alone. The thought of confronting Daniel churned in my stomach. We'd known each other since college. He was the best man at my wedding. The guy who would show up unannounced with a six-pack when I was having a bad day. Now, the same guy had been sneaking around with Amanda behind my back. And not just him. The others, too. Chris with his constant jokes, Mike with his loud laughs, Jacob with his quiet loyalty, traitors, all of them. The betrayal wasn't just Amanda's. It was theirs, too. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, breaking the silence. It was Amanda. Her name on the screen made me want to throw the phone out the window. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. Amanda, where did you go? Amanda, can we talk about this? Amanda, you're being ridiculous. Ridiculous. That word pushed me over the edge. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, my breath coming out in ragged gasps. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She was annoyed, like I was the one ruining her night. I ignored her messages and opened my contacts instead. My thumb hovered over Daniel's name. I wanted to call him, to scream at him, to ask how he could do this to me. But what would that achieve? He'd probably deny everything, or worse, tell me it wasn't a big deal. No. I wasn't going to give him or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing me break. If Amanda and the others thought they could make a fool out of me, they had another thing coming. That's when the idea started to form. A plan, rough and unpolished but satisfying in its simplicity. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to make them regret ever crossing me. The first step was preparation. If I was going to bring them down, I needed proof. I thought back to Amanda's phone, the texts, the photos. There was enough there to ruin her life, and probably theirs, too. But I needed more. Something irrefutable. I sat there in the car, staring at the stars, the cold night air seeping through the cracked window. This wasn't going to be quick. It wasn't going to be easy. But it was going to be worth it. Pulling out my phone again, I searched for a private investigator in town. It was late, but I left a voicemail, my voice steady despite the fire burning inside me. This is Ryan. I need your help with gathering some evidence. It's urgent. Call me back as soon as you can. Hanging up, I felt the first flicker of control return. The anger was still there, but it had transformed into something sharper, more focused. I wasn't just a man scorned anymore. I was a man with a mission. As I started the car, Amanda's texts kept coming in. I didn't read them. Let her stew. This was just the beginning. The next morning, the house was quiet. Amanda stayed in bed longer than usual, probably avoiding me. I poured myself a coffee, the bitterness grounding me as I sat at the kitchen table. Her phone wasn't on the counter anymore. She must have hidden it, realizing her mistake. But it didn't matter. What I'd seen was enough to fuel what needed to come next. She eventually came downstairs, her movements cautious, like she was walking on eggshells. Her gaze flicked toward me, but I didn't bother looking up. She lingered near the kitchen, opening cabinets aimlessly before muttering something about needing to go out. I nodded, nonchalant, as if I didn't care. Once she was gone, I pulled out my laptop. The private investigator Dave had called earlier, and I needed to send him the details he'd asked for. It felt strange typing out the names of my so-called friends, Daniel, Chris, Mike, Jacob, and listing possible places where Amanda might have met them. The more I wrote, the angrier I became. By the time I hit send, my chest felt tight, but not from hesitation. It was rage mixed with cold determination. I wasn't going to let this slide. They all thought they could outsmart me, play me for a fool. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Amanda returned after a couple of hours. Her mood clipped. She barely spoke to me and avoided eye contact as she busied herself with cleaning, something she only did when she was anxious. I stayed out of her way, giving her the illusion that I was indifferent. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Seeing his name made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to pick up. His casual tone grated on me, acting as though everything was fine, like he hadn't stabbed me in the back. "Didn't see you at poker night last week," he said. "Everything good?" I bit back the urge to unleash my fury. Instead, I kept my tone even, playing along. "Yeah, just busy." We ended the call quickly, but the sound of his voice lingered, stoking the fire inside me. These people, my wife, my friends, they were carrying on like nothing had happened, like I was oblivious. They had no idea the walls were closing in. The next week was a delicate game of patience. I went through the motions of daily life, careful not to arouse suspicion. Amanda remained distant but calm, like someone who thought the storm had passed. She didn't realize the eye of it was hovering right over her. Meanwhile, Dave, the private investigator, wasted no time. Each evening, I received updates. Photos, timestamps, receipts, even surveillance footage. Amanda wasn't just careless. She was downright reckless. Hotel rendezvous, late-night parking lot meetups. Each piece of evidence painted a picture of betrayal so blatant it made my stomach turn. Daniel, unsurprisingly, featured prominently. He wasn't just sneaking around with Amanda. He seemed proud of it, strutting into hotels like it was a badge of honor. Mike and Chris weren't far behind. Texts revealing flirtatious exchanges and inappropriate late-night meetings. Even Jacob, the quiet one, had his share of complicity. Every update strengthened my resolve. These weren't mistakes. They weren't lapses in judgment. They were deliberate, calculated betrayals. At home, I started organizing the evidence. My laptop became a war room, folders labeled with each of their names. Amanda's file was the largest, filled with screenshots, videos, and documents that would obliterate any defense she might try to make. The others had their own share of damning proof, each file a ticking time bomb waiting to go off. Amanda didn't seem to notice the change in me, or maybe she was too busy keeping up her charade. She spent her evenings scrolling through her phone or watching TV, acting as though our marriage was still intact. I, on the other hand, was already planning the dinner party that would blow it all apart. Invitations went out on a Wednesday. Casual, friendly texts inviting the group to a small gathering at our home. "Let's catch up," I wrote, keeping the tone light. They all accepted without hesitation, completely unaware of what awaited them. The night before the party, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the folder of evidence I had printed out and organized. Amanda walked in, giving me a brief smile, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. "You seem better," she remarked, her tone almost hopeful. I nodded. Just needed some clarity. She didn't press further, taking my response at face value. As she walked away, I couldn't help but think how fitting it was. Tomorrow, she would finally understand just how clear everything had become. The table was set. The players were in place. All that was left was to light the match. Friday arrived with a strange stillness in the air, like the calm before a storm. Amanda spent the afternoon preparing appetizers and tidying up the house, humming to herself like she was hosting an ordinary gathering. The sight of her cheerful efficiency was almost laughable. She had no idea that tonight wasn't for bonding, it was for reckoning. By 7 p.m., the guests started trickling in. Daniel was the first to arrive, carrying a bottle of red wine like some kind of peace offering. His smile was as wide as ever, his handshake firm. He clapped me on the back and said, "Good to see you, man. Been too long." I forced a smile, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. "Yeah, it has. Make yourself comfortable." Chris and Mike showed up together, loud and boisterous as always. Jacob followed shortly after, his usual quiet demeanor making him seem almost innocent in the group's dynamic. Amanda flitted around the room, playing the perfect hostess. She offered drinks and made small talk, her laughter ringing out like nails on a chalkboard. As everyone settled in, I let the conversation flow naturally, keeping up appearances. Stories were shared, jokes cracked. It was almost surreal. I watched them laugh and banter, the same way we always had, as if the bonds between us were still intact. Finally, it was time. I stood, raising my glass for a toast. The room quieted, all eyes turning toward me. To loyalty, I began, my voice steady. To trust, to friendship, and to betrayal. A ripple of confusion spread through the group. Amanda froze mid-step, her smile faltering. "What are you talking about?" Daniel asked, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. I reached under the table and pulled out the thick manila folder. It landed on the table with a thud, drawing everyone's attention. My hands were steady as I opened it, sliding out the first set of photographs. "This," I said, holding up an image of Daniel and Amanda walking into a hotel together, their faces unmistakable. "This is what I'm talking about." The room fell silent. Amanda's face drained of color, her hands trembling. Daniel's jaw clenched as he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "What the hell is this?" Chris blurted out, his usual bravado replaced with panic. I ignored him, pulling out another set of papers. These were texts, explicit messages between Amanda and the others, each exchange more damning than the last. It's not just Daniel, I continued, my voice cold. Chris, Mike, Jacob, you're all in this. Every single one of you. The tension in the room was suffocating. Amanda finally found her voice, though it cracked under the weight of her panic. Ryan, I can explain. Don't. I cut her off, my gaze like ice. I don't want your excuses. I want the truth, and I already have it. One by one, I laid out the evidence. Photos of Mike and Amanda meeting in a parking lot. Screenshots of Chris's flirtatious texts. Logs of Jacob's late-night conversations where he played the quiet confidant. You all thought I wouldn't find out, I said, my voice rising slightly. You thought I was blind, too trusting, too stupid. But here we are. Daniel's face was a mixture of fury and shame. You've got it all wrong. No, I snapped, cutting him off. I've got it exactly right. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No pity. No regret. Just a quiet satisfaction as I watched them squirm under the weight of their actions. You think you've gotten away with this for so long, I said, my voice steady again. But tonight, everything changes. Phones began buzzing as I revealed the final card up my sleeve. I had already sent the evidence to their spouses, families, and even a few of their employers. The fallout was happening in real time. The room erupted in chaos, Daniel shouting, Chris stammering, Amanda sobbing. But I didn't care. I had done what I came to do. As they scrambled to contain the destruction, I stood and walked out of the room. The door shut behind me, cutting off the noise. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. This wasn't the end of my journey, but it was the end of theirs. The morning after the dinner party was eerily quiet. The house felt emptier than usual, even though Amanda was still there. She hadn't left her room, and I didn't bother checking on her. The chaos I unleashed last night was still rippling through our lives, but I had no regrets. I spent the morning scrolling through social media and texts, watching the fallout unfold in real time. The group chat with my so-called friends was now a war zone, filled with frantic messages, accusations, and desperate attempts to control the damage. Chris, you went too far, man. My wife is threatening to leave me. Daniel, we need to talk. Face to face. Call me. Mike, how could you do this to us, Ryan? We've been friends for years. I laughed bitterly. Friends. What a joke. Later, I received a message from Carla, Daniel's wife. Carla, thank you for telling me the truth. I had no idea. He's gone. I kicked him out this morning. Daniel's perfect life was already crumbling, and I knew the others wouldn't be far behind. Chris's wife, Stella, had always been vocal about her no-tolerance policy for infidelity. Mike's wife, Emily, was a quiet woman, but the few times we'd spoken, she struck me as someone who wouldn't forgive betrayal easily. By noon, Amanda finally emerged. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face pale. She looked like she hadn't slept, which was fitting. I hadn't either, but for entirely different reasons. Ryan, she said softly, her voice cracking. We need to talk. I set my coffee down, leaning back in my chair. Talk about what? Her lip trembled. About what happened last night. About us. There is no us, Amanda, I said, my voice cold. Not anymore. She flinched but pressed on. I know I made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but… Mistakes? I interrupted, standing up. You call betraying me with not one, not two, but 4 of my closest friends a mistake? Tears spilled down her cheeks. I was lost. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought we could fix this. I laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. Fix this? Amanda, the foundation of our marriage is gone. You destroyed it the moment you decided I wasn't enough. She didn't respond, just stood there sobbing, clutching the back of the chair for support. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity. This was the woman I had loved, the woman I thought I would spend my life with. But that woman no longer existed. I've already contacted a lawyer, I said, my voice steady. You'll be hearing from them soon. Her sobs turned into a wail, but I didn't stay to listen. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I met with my lawyer in the afternoon to finalize the divorce proceedings. With the evidence I had, there was no question about who would walk away with custody of the house, and more importantly, who wouldn't. By evening, I received more updates from the fallout. Daniel's employer had caught wind of the scandal, thanks to an anonymous email I sent. Carla wasn't the only one kicking him out. His boss was too. Chris had been ousted from his community group, a public shaming he probably thought would never happen. Mike had been fired after my anonymous tip revealed his shady dealings, leaving him with no job and no reputation. Jacob, the least involved but still guilty, found himself alienated from his own social circle. Everyone now saw him for what he was, a complicit bystander. As I sat on the couch that night, the weight of it all started to settle. My life had been turned upside down, but so had theirs. I had taken everything they thought was secure and ripped it away, the same way they had done to me. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. The pieces of my old life were gone, but that just meant I could start rebuilding. On my terms. The weekend after the dinner party was a blur of finality. Amanda stayed holed up in the guest room, probably too ashamed to face me, though she made no move to leave the house. I didn't care. She was a ghost to me now. I spent the time packing her things, boxing up the life we'd built together into neat, labeled cartons. The sight of those boxes in the hallway was strangely liberating. When Monday morning came, I called her down. She shuffled into the living room, her expression hollow. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing weakly at the boxes. "Your stuff," I said bluntly. "I've contacted your sister. She'll be here by noon to pick them up." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she sank onto the couch, staring at the floor. "Amanda," I said, my tone measured but firm. "This isn't your home anymore. You need to leave." She looked up, her eyes glassy. "Where am I supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I replied, crossing my arms. "You made your choices. Now you live with them." By noon, Amanda's sister arrived, her face a mix of pity and disapproval. She barely said a word to me as she helped load the boxes into her car. Amanda stood silently by the doorway, watching her life being packed away. Before she left, she turned to me. "Ryan." "Don't," I interrupted. "You've said enough." She hesitated, then nodded, her head hanging low as she climbed into the passenger seat. The car pulled out of the driveway, and just like that, she was gone. That evening, I went through my phone, deleting contacts. Daniel, Chris, Mike, Jacob. Their names were erased with a few taps of my finger. But as simple as it was, each deletion felt like a small victory. Their worlds were already falling apart. Carla had filed for divorce from Daniel, taking everything she could. Chris's wife was staying with her parents, deciding whether to leave him for good. Mike was scrambling to find work after his shady dealings were exposed, while Jacob had become a pariah in his social circle. The fallout was unfolding exactly as I'd planned. Later that night, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Amanda's wedding photo had once hung. The silence in the house was deafening, but for the first time, it didn't feel oppressive. I grabbed my laptop and began searching for new cities, new opportunities. I didn't want to stay here, surrounded by the ghosts of betrayal. My kids deserved better, and so did I. A fresh start wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a necessity. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. Amanda's absence was tangible, but instead of grief, I felt a strange sense of calm. I spent the next few days tying up loose ends. The divorce papers were already in motion, and my lawyer assured me that with the evidence I'd provided, the process would be swift and heavily in my favor. But staying in this town wasn't an option. Everywhere I went, I saw reminders of what had happened, of who I used to be before all of this. My friends' faces, Amanda's smile, the places we used to go, it was suffocating. I needed a clean break. I started researching new cities, new opportunities. A job offer in a mid-sized city caught my eye. It wasn't flashy, but it was far enough away that no one would recognize me. No whispers, no pitying glances, just a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. Packing up the house felt symbolic, each box another step toward letting go of the past. I moved room by room, discarding anything that felt tainted by Amanda or the people who had betrayed me. Her pictures, their gifts, even the furniture they had lounged on, it all went. By the end of the week, the house felt almost unrecognizable, stripped down to its bare essentials. One evening, as I taped up the last box in the living room, my phone buzzed. A text from Carla. Carla, just wanted to say thank you again. I'm not sure where I'd be if you hadn't told me the truth. I stared at the message for a long moment. Carla had been blindsided, just like me, but she'd handled it with a strength I couldn't help but admire. Me, you deserved to know. I'm glad you're moving forward. Carla, it's not easy, but it's better than living a lie. If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me. I put the phone down, her words lingering in my mind. Moving forward wasn't easy, but she was right. It was better than staying stuck in the wreckage. The move came quickly. I found a small rental house in the new city, close to my kids' new school. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and that made it enough. On the first night there, I stood in the empty living room, a box of takeout on the floor and my kids asleep in their rooms. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to breathe. I looked out the window at the unfamiliar street, the faint hum of a new life just beginning to stir. The anger, the betrayal, it was all still there, but it no longer consumed me. This was the start of something different, something better. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was free. The days in the new city passed slowly at first. The house was modest but clean, and the quiet streets felt like a world away from the chaos I'd left behind. My kids adjusted quicker than I expected. Their laughter, muffled through the walls as they played in their rooms, became my anchor. The job started off steady, a marketing position at a local firm. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. The work gave me something to focus on, a purpose to channel my energy into. My coworkers were friendly enough, though I kept my personal life to myself. The scars of betrayal were too fresh to share. In the evenings, after dinner and homework with the kids, I started running. At first, it was just to clear my head, to outrun the thoughts that sometimes still haunted me. But soon it became a ritual. Each mile felt like I was shedding another layer of pain, replacing it with strength and resolve. A few weeks after the move, I got a call from Carla. I just wanted to check in, she said. How's the new place? Quiet, I replied. Exactly what I needed. She hesitated before speaking again. I'm thinking about moving too. It's hard staying in the same house where everything happened. I get that, I said. And I did. There was something healing about distance, about starting fresh without the weight of familiar places and faces. I owe you, Ryan, she added. You didn't have to tell me everything, but you did. I'm not sure I'd have had the courage to leave otherwise. You don't owe me anything, I said firmly. We were both blindsided. You did what you had to do. Her voice softened. Still, if you ever need anything, I'm here. Life slowly began to take shape again. I found a rhythm: work, kids, running, repeat. I even started volunteering at my kids' school, helping with events and getting to know other parents. It was strange, meeting people who only knew this version of me, not the man I was before. One afternoon, while picking up my son from soccer practice, I met a woman named Leah. She was another parent, her daughter on the same team. We struck up a casual conversation about the game, which somehow turned into a 20-minute chat about everything from our kids' teachers to the best local pizza spots. She had an easy laugh and a calm presence, the kind that made you forget your troubles, even if only for a moment. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later that night, as I cleaned up after dinner, I realized it had been a while since I'd talked to someone like that. Someone who didn't know my history, who didn't look at me with pity or judgment. The kids seemed happier too. My daughter, always perceptive, noticed the change in me. You smile more now, Daddy, she said one evening as we watched a movie together. I glanced at her, surprised. I do. She nodded, her little face serious. You didn't smile much before. But here you do. Her words stayed with me long after she'd fallen asleep. She was right. Somehow, in the midst of starting over, I had found pieces of myself I thought I'd lost. One night, I sat down with a notebook and started writing. Not a journal, exactly, Just thoughts, memories, plans for the future. At first, it was scattered, messy. But as the pages filled, I began to see a pattern emerging. This wasn't just about moving on. It was about rebuilding, reclaiming the parts of me that betrayal had tried to destroy. And piece by piece I was doing it. Months passed, and the pieces of my new life started to fit together. The quiet house was beginning to feel like home. The kids were thriving. My son had joined a soccer league, and my daughter had made a best friend in her class. Their laughter filled the rooms that once felt empty, reminding me daily of why I had fought so hard to break free from the lies. I kept things simple: work, family, and my running. It became a sort of meditation, each step on the pavement grounding me in the present, pulling me further from the chaos I'd left behind. One evening, as I sorted through old documents, I came across the folder of evidence I'd used to expose Amanda and the others. I hadn't looked at it since the dinner party. Sitting there with the folder in my hands, I realized something. I didn't need it anymore. The anger that once consumed me had dulled into something quieter, a distant memory rather than a daily weight. Amanda's betrayal, Daniel's lies, the fallout, it had all been real, and it had hurt like hell. But it didn't define me anymore. I stood, carrying the folder to the fireplace. As the flames consumed the pages, I felt something lift, like a chain finally snapping free. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it was closure. That weekend, Leah invited me and the kids to a barbecue at her place. It was casual, just a few parents and their kids, but I hesitated at first. Starting over in a new city had been easier when I kept to myself. Letting people in felt risky, but my daughter's excitement pushed me out the door. "Come on, Daddy," she urged, tugging at my hand. "You're always saying we need to make friends." Leah greeted us with her warm smile, her daughter bouncing over to join the other kids in the yard. It wasn't long before I found myself laughing along with the other parents, the awkwardness fading as we swapped stories about work and parenting. Leah and I ended up sitting together as the sun set, watching the kids chase fireflies. "You seem more at ease," she said, glancing at me. "Do I?" She nodded. "When we first met, you seemed guarded, like you were carrying something heavy. But now, you look lighter." I thought about her words, about the months that had passed since I'd left everything behind. She was right. The weight was still there, but it wasn't crushing me anymore. "Maybe I am," I admitted, a small smile tugging at my lips. Leah didn't push for more, just smiled back. We sat in comfortable silence, the sound of kids laughing and crickets chirping filling the air. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, my daughter looked up at me, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you happy, Daddy?" The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think I am." Her smile was all the reassurance I needed. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't seem like something to fear. It was wide open, waiting to be written. And this time, I would make sure it was a story worth living. Life didn't magically fix itself, but it grew brighter, piece by piece. The echoes of betrayal didn't vanish overnight, but they faded into the background as new memories took their place. My kids became my compass, their joy pulling me forward, their resilience teaching me that even the deepest wounds could heal. Amanda tried reaching out a few times, her calls and messages dwindling as it became clear I wouldn't respond. I had nothing left to say to her. My silence wasn't about punishment, it was about peace. Moving on meant cutting ties completely, and I refused to look back. Daniel and the others were ghosts now, their once familiar presence replaced by the solid foundation of real friendships I was beginning to build. People who knew me as I was now, not as someone they could exploit or deceive. One crisp autumn afternoon, I found myself at the edge of a trail with Leah. She had joined me on one of my runs, her laughter cutting through the quiet woods as we jogged side by side. "Are you sure you're not just using this to show off?" she teased, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Maybe," I admitted with a grin, slowing down to match her pace. It wasn't just about running anymore. It was about sharing the journey, letting someone in little by little. Leah wasn't a replacement for what I lost. She was something entirely new, someone who met me where I was and never asked for more than I could give. That night, as I stood on the porch of my little rental house, the The stars above seemed clearer, closer somehow. The kids were asleep, their laughter from earlier still echoing in the corners of the home we were building together. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of quiet contentment. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, it had shaped me, but it didn't define me anymore. I had been broken, yes, but I wasn't beaten. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs, and looked out at the street ahead. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. A new chapter, waiting to be written. And I was ready.